So welcome to all of you to our new edition of Leaders Who Have Something to Say. This is the place to be on a Sunday to get inspired with outstanding leaders, actionable advice. I'm Mariana Ferrari, and I'm going to be your host today. And with me, I have Felipe Barreiro, General Manager at Medtronic Brazil, best known to be the revolutionary, game-changing leader. In the control room, we have Amsi Jackson, our executive producer, and Fatima Calderon. She's going to be helping us with your cues because, most importantly, you are on the chat ready to start firing those cues and comments that you might have for us tonight. Now, before we all start, let's take a moment to think and pray for all the people that are in Ukraine and Russia today who have not chosen to be in this terrible, horrible war. So, Felipe, having that second of reflection today, it's a pleasure to have you with us in such a critical moment and time in our history where leadership is at stake and change is so needed. So having you on board here, it is such a blessing.
Thank you very much, Mariana. It's a pleasure to be with you and deeply touched by everything that's going on in the world today. And I think that leadership is at its most important and critical moment because exactly the things that we're going through that requires leaders to be sensitive, to be human, to be connected with the environment. So I'm happy to share this next hour with you in the audience and talk about my experience really as a leader.
Sure. Well, so let's start with a question that I have for you. And I'm sure that the audience is wishing that I'm going to make it right at start, which is how do you break the status quo in an organization if you want to bring change? And to me, I'm reminded of a quote that my ex-boss at ING gave to me. And it's a quote from Machiavelli that says, "There is nothing more difficult to do and uncertain than to take the lead in the interaction of a new order of things, as the innovator has for enemies all those who had benefited from the old conditions, and lukewarm defenders or supporters in those who may do well under the new." So how do we break the status quo?
That's a powerful quote. And in my view, breaking the status quo is about, I'll even start by saying that hardly I'll bring stuff here that's absolutely new and disruptive in essence. I'll be talking about things that are pretty intuitive, but we forget about those things given other priorities and distractions in our day-to-day lives, in our commitments, the targets that we are expected to deliver against. So to me, the most efficient way to break status quo is going back to our core, understanding what our values are, understanding what we are expected to deliver as individuals and as organizations, which the organizations are in a very honest way. Organizations are composed of groups of individuals, big or small, that are acting together towards something. And if we understand what we're here to do, understanding the essence, what is expected of those organizations, I understand that we can break the status quo of just driving towards achieving goals. The world is analog, and we are trying to gauge it, to measure it digitally. And it's, I believe the best way to describe it is we're driving on a road where you have straights and you have turns and you have curves and you have ups and you have downs. And what you're trying to do is to put guardrails to make sure that you stay on track. In the end of the day, if you were concerned about those guardrails, you are more concerned about aspects such as performance indicators, such as earnings per share, such as metrics, even non-financial. Where you should be really concerned about is driving on the road. And to be able to drive on that road, you have to focus on the essence, right? What we're here to do.
So you said on the beginning of your answer, you spoke about values, going back to the essence and going back to the values. And I was thinking, I mean, I couldn't agree more with you. And I'm thinking that maybe the status quo, it's exactly the opposite. It's, it's because they were driving into those metrics, they are obsessed with those metrics. They forget what the essence is and the core values of a company and its people as an organization, as you were saying, about the values. So that is so interesting, Felipe. Thank you for reminding us and for reminding every single leader that might be out there listening to us that if you're struggling with people, if you're struggling with making your results, then maybe you should go back to the core and think it's time to do things differently, right? Felipe, you are the ambassador of do things differently.
Yeah, and it's all about people, as you said, Mariana. Individuals who are closer connected to their essence, to what is expected of them, will, as a consequence, deliver better results. So if we put our focus on making sure that we are engaging with that core, with what we should be doing, we are working towards a better outcome for our company, for our society, for all stakeholders that are involved in what we do. It's really that simple. Conceptually, it's that simple. How to get there requires a lot of effort because, as I said, right, our world pulls us further away from that essence through things that are very important, but they are guardrails. We were talking about those metrics and stuff. In the end of the day, it's those become distractions if that's what you're focusing in, right? You should be focusing on things that will deliver against them, and they will come as a consequence.
So give me 1 second, because before I go on to my next question, I want to remind our audience that if you want us, or Felipe in this case, to go deeper into a question or into his answer, or if you have a question about whatever we're saying or a comment, it's so welcome. So go ahead. We have Fatima here that she's going to be shooting all of your comments and all of your questions to us. And then at the end, then we'll address them. So Felipe, I wanted to take you back to August of 2020. That's when you, living in Miami and already working for Medtronic, I believe for 8 years, something like that, you became the general manager for Medtronic Brazil, but yet it was the middle of the pandemic. You're working in the healthcare industry. And you become a remote general manager of a huge market like Brazil. So what did you do on those first 60 days, and I believe it was remotely, that would set the pace and the voice and the tone of your leadership style?
It's in the first 90 days. So I have every time I take a new role, I draw a 90-day plan, which is what do I want to achieve first? Very structured. I'm very organized. I'm an engineer. I work by planning. I like a quote by Victor Hugo, the French philosopher, who says, fail in planning is planning to fail, right? So I plan exhaustively, but I do not necessarily follow that plan all the way through, because the world is analog, as I was saying, right? So you need some flexibility. One thing that I did plan on, and I did deliver on that, was to connect with as many people as I could, considering all those stakeholders, my team, my direct reports, the people that reported into them. When I look outside, our customers, patients, all stakeholders, distributors, providers, and I did more than 90 interviews or meetings with people in those 90 days. And if you take those 90 days, actually business days, you're talking about 65, 70, right? So I did more than one a day in that period.
Wow. Wow. And I'm sure that you learned a lot, and then you could plan for, your strategy or whatever your strategy was going to be.
Yes.
So as a change maker, you don't necessarily agree with the status quo, and you don't necessarily agree with everybody's way of doing things. And we've heard so much about, the horizontal leadership style and the vertical leadership style, and how now you have to be like very horizontal, like Mark Zuckerberg, everything open. But you have a different take that it's called diagonal leadership, and it's unique to you. So can you tell us a little bit more about it, and why do you think it's working for you?
I'll start by asking you a question. What animal comes to mind when you think about leadership? What is the animal that comes to your mind?
About leadership, the animal. That's a hard one, huh? Maybe the lion, like the Lion King, right? Maybe. Lion's
a good one. Strength, right? Power.
And also view, I think, that they're like up on the hill also, and kind of they take care of everybody, they make sure that.
Yeah, the king of the jungle. Yeah. My animal is a seagull. That's the animal, seagull. And the reason why it's a seagull is because the seagull is flying up high, looking things from high above, but every now he doesn't stay there. Okay. Every now and then it goes and dive deep, and goes deep and dives, and then catches the fish and goes back. So my style of leadership relates to that, the seagull. Oh, okay. I spend most of my time looking from above to understand the big picture, to make sure that I'm taking decisions strategically, looking at the long term. But then I dive and I go understand the depth in detail and understand what's beneath the surface to be able to build something that makes sense from all vantage points, from every level in the organization. So my style of leadership is a combination between the horizontal and the vertical. Meaning, so you just tilted it a little bit. I tilted it a little bit. I mixed those two styles. The traditional style, which is the vertical, where you're respecting the hierarchy a lot more, and you're giving directions, with the style which is more inclusive in nature. You're a part of a sum, you are a part of a team. So I dance between those two styles, because I believe that the world today, with all the complexity and all the changes that we're going through, require you to have that adaptability, to be able to dance between those two styles, bringing the best out of each of them. Wow, that is so cool, Felipe. I like it. And how do you apply it? Like, can you give us an example of a day-to-day application? Yeah, so I can give you a few examples of things that we're doing in Medtronic. Yes. We were talking just before we started live about the Jogo Aberto, right? Which is a program. Jogo Aberto in Portuguese means open table, an informal conversation. And we have this Jogo Aberto is similar to a town hall on a monthly basis, but typically there are not a lot of rules, very simple ones. So we have a core subject that we're going to talk, but then it's about half and half between us, the leaders. It's not about me, it's the entire leadership of the organization. Us addressing a certain topic to the organization, the other half, it's an hour and a half. And the last 45 minutes listening in to all sorts of questions. So we build that muscle of bridging that vertical gap, right, between the higher levels of the organization and the people that are more at the bottom of the pyramid through that program. Another one that I can mention is we created a program which is also to bridge gaps now individually. So we could pair people randomly in 2 by 2 randomly, and we run those pairings and people interact. it's a volunteer program, but a lot of the employees engaged on it. I also participated. By the way, I try to be in as much as those programs as I can to learn from it, to lead from example, right? And we connect, and I've been connecting with people from all levels of the organization through that and learning with their experience too, building a more robust organization as you do that.
You know that if we go back for 1 second to the town hall that you were mentioning, do you have, for that 80-20, do you have any sort of ground rules or I don't know, ways to motivate people to really ask the questions or make the comments, even if those are the hard ones?
It was an interesting progress that we saw during every edition of the Jogo Aberto. So the first one, people were shyer, even though we had room specifically for Q&A. Hardly ever you had people raising their hands, asking questions, or the questions that were asked were more the politically correct or accepted questions, right?
Right.
This program has been in place for about 1.5 years now, and the last few editions of it, you receive challenging questions. And the best way to approach them is to face them as natural. I even like when the questions are challenging, because that means that the organization is healthy, right? Mm-hmm. And then addressing those questions also with a pure spirit. If you have the answer, give the answer. If you don't have the answer, you say, we need to work on this together, or that's something that we need to figure out. It's a problem to which we don't have an immediate solution to. The leader, by the way, this is a myth. The leader is not expected, or the leaders, right, me included in it, are not expected to have the answers to all the questions. We're expected to help the organization, inspire the organization to build the solutions or to build the answers to certain questions that are hard.
Mm-hmm. So here we have Corinne Noob from Harvard that she's on the chat, and she's asking, she says, I like the 90-day plan for new managers, but wonder if managers who have been in the role for a long time should occasionally pretend they are new and take a fresh look, ask basic questions again, and do the type of diagnostic new leaders conduct and plan at different horizons. What do you think?
I love it. I watched Corinne last Sunday, and I learned a ton from that hour. I particularly like the part where she said there is a disconnect between the speech and the behavior. So here, when we're focusing on the essence, we kind of are even challenging our speech to be coherent with our behavior, right? Because we're going to that very core. It's impossible at that core for you to have a speech which distances yourself from the behavior. It's very hard to drive everything to get there. But in essence, if you're doing that well, that problem gets solved automatically, right? Now, to this question, new leaders, or every now and then, you get used to the role, you get comfortable in it. So throwing in a 90-day plan, let's say after a while that you've been in the role, after your learning curve, you feel that your learning curve is starting to flat, throw in that 90-day plan will definitely bring oxygen and for you to learn new things, right? I think it's a brilliant idea. I love it.
Okay. Well, listen, I've heard from her, I believe, or I read a Harvard business case when I was preparing for her interview. I think it's very interesting, maybe for your town hall, it's an idea that she mentioned somewhere that in this open spaces or Joe Aberto, maybe it's good to assign some people randomly one day to be the discord, but that they can be assigned that role. So not that everybody would say, oh, look at that question. No, but they become the discord, the official discord. So that can help innovate and bring questions that might be difficult and that they're not that easy to play, so I don't know, that's an idea for you.
It's a tool that might serve a purpose in a moment where you still need those guardrails to make sure that you are on track.
Okay.
But then once you don't need those guardrails anymore, then it becomes a genuine process. And we're learning that in Jogo Aberto. Now you have those kind of discords all the time. And it's beautiful.
It's so interesting, Felipe.
Really? Because every time that you connect there, you don't know what to expect. It's not a controlled environment. But at least in Medtronic Brazil, we now understand that we have the environment where people feel that they have a voice, regardless if that's in consonance to what they are expected to, or if they think something absolutely different. And we build into those, and we learn from those, and we build better solutions. You see, the way I think about this, very genuine, Mariana, the larger your spectrum of thought, experiences, life stories, academic background, race, age, preferences, the broader it is, the better the solutions that you're driving. So in the context of having an open conversation in large or small venues, if you're really having an open conversation without cutting off or without limiting or without filtering things, in the end of the day, that will benefit you to build solutions that are stronger, more sustainable, and will stay on its feet for a longer period of time.
Yes, absolutely, Felipe. How important is to bring all that diversity, which of course it's not easy to gain. I mean, you have lived in several countries already, speak different languages, Korean as well, myself as well, but not everybody has that international exposure to different cultures, different, races, religions, and also just the culture. I mean, even if it is your same religion, your same race, the culture of each country, it's so different. And I'm going to step out of my questions right now. And speaking about that diversity, I want you to explain, as a Brazilian, for the rest of the world, to listen to you, how, for example, two cities and two people like the Cariocas and the Sao Paulistas are so different, because everybody would think of Brazil as, it's a huge market, and like one market. And Brazil, like any other country, it's so different in different places, but especially, Cariocas from Rio and Paulistas from Sao Paulo. Can you give us some tips?
Yeah, I think in the end of the day, Mariana, and as you were asking that question, it reminded me of how I conduct interviews for people who work for me. Okay. I'm looking at their heart. I'm not looking at their brain. I'm probably looking at their brain 20% of the time, while 80% of the time, I'm looking at their heart, meaning their intentions, meaning their level of energy, meaning their values, and how that connects to what we are doing. The brain and those cultural aspects between Rio and Sao Paulo, those are really peripheral to what is, to me, a lot more important, which is really doing the right thing, right? That's what should be driving. And regardless if the person comes from Rio or from Sao Paulo, we have those contrasts.
Oh, yeah, I know, but just, for someone who's, for example, who's going to be doing business in Brazil and knows nothing about Brazil, understanding the difference, it's like in Spain between Madrid and Barcelona, yes, it is everything in Spain, but, but there are differences that you might have to be, especially today, very sensitive to some of those differences.
Yeah. So I would say the following. In Rio, people are, it's hard to generalize, but in Rio, people are known to be more emotionally driven, and in Sao Paulo, more rationally driven. So if you're doing business with people in Rio, probably it's good to start with a coffee, talk about life, talk about the weather, how beautiful the beaches are, samba, carnival, and that kind of stuff. If you're in Sao Paulo, you go straight to the topic, right? You start the meeting with the topic at hand. Typically, as Brazilians, we like a little bit of talking. Yeah. But then splitting between Rio and Sao Paulo, you have those nuances, which are interesting. I come from Sao Paulo. I can see that pretty clear in my background where, yeah, okay, we had enough of the talking. Now let's go down to business, right?
Okay.
In Rio, they spend more time socializing in the meetings. Both of them, if they're doing the right thing, both of them, in the end of the day, will drive to the same results, as I was saying in the very beginning, right? That's how at least I feel about it.
Well, thank you for that parenthesis, but I think it's important for everybody to start understanding that there are beautiful differences among each other, and that's what makes us so unique. So, being different doesn't mean being better or being worse. It just means that each one of us brings something that it's very unique to us to the table, and where we come from usually has some sort of blueprint in the way we behave. So going back to our questions, Felipe, today I read an article that made me thought about you and how you're conducting business at Medtronic. And the article was about customer centricity in Latin America and in Spain. And if anybody reads it, I mean, it's not very, very optimistic because only 16% of people are really satisfied with the companies that they work with. I mean, not work as an employee, but the companies that are serving them, especially lower in the health industry. Now, when I read it, I thought, wow, this is a great opportunity. I mean, if you come and you do the right thing just a little bit better, I mean, you can conquer the market. And then I thought, Felipe is going to love this. So tell us about your inside out behavioral change in the organization.
It's really about, not to be repetitive, on bringing that organization closer to its core, right?
Okay.
And how are we doing that? And why is it so important to bring it closer to its core? Simon Sinek Golden Circle, right? The why. It's so simple, but it's so hard to execute on. And why do we need to be closer to the core? So that we can understand the core, so that we can nurture the core, and so that we can do that core flourish. How are we doing that in Medtronic Brazil? We put everybody on the same boat, literally. So we have the blue ship, which we're calling Medtronic Brazil, the big blue transatlantic. It's a major organization, and we serve lives in the entire country. We have a big portfolio. So we started by saying everybody's part of this ship, regardless if you're the commander of this ship, if you're working in the engine room, or if you're working in the kitchen. We all need to give a pleasant experience to our passengers, to our customers. So everything that we're doing in Medtronic today, and it's even fun to do it like that, we're adapting that ship logo, where everybody's part of the ship, and the people that work in the supporting areas, they are pretending that they are in the engine room, that the engine cannot fail. And you have the salespeople who are facing customers and feeding them in the restaurant. So we're playing around with that, but at the end of the day, it translates into engagement with our mission, with what is expected of us. And in such a noble area, which is healthcare, right? If you do your mission well, if you deliver what is expected of you well, in the end of the day, you have patients who are treated, you have patients who are feeling better, you have diseases that are being cured. So that's, to me, the area that I work for is by almost by default is a very noble area to be in. So how to drive this in the medical area? I think it's, what do we do for living? We're here helping people who have potentially life-threatening conditions, who have chronic pain, who have diseases, and we're here helping that people. What an honor, what a privilege to be in that segment.
Yeah, I know that in the United States, there's the culture not only of client centricity, but of patient centricity, which is so different the game that it's played, at hospitals. And we'll discuss that with our next guest next week, which I'm going to later let you know who she is. But I do understand that in Latin America, even in Brazil, where the medical or the medicine, it's pretty good, it's not yet there. I mean, there's no patient centricity care. Are you trying to bring that to Brazil?
Oh, absolutely. In the end of the day, we are going back to the engine, we are one gear in this complex environment, right, of healthcare, where you have payers, you have patients, you have hospitals, you have surgeons, nurses, you have the society who's expecting something of you, you have the government. So in the end of the day, how we put the patient in the center of our decisions, really, which we go back to our essence.
Right.
Think about that. Medtronic was created to help patients with heart conditions. That's how the company began in the 50s, right? If we go back to that and we do this job well enough, we'll be able to putting the patient in the center, help them, but also do something that makes sense from a payer's perspective, from a hospital perspective, from a doctor perspective, from a government perspective. That's why it's not easy. That's because you have to move things that make sense for all those stakeholders, and eventually priorities are contrasting. So how do you find and synergize? Well, what we're here for, what are hospitals here for? Surgeons, ourselves, Medtronic, government in that area to help patients, to get more patients access to good quality care. So if we work towards that same goal, we're able to find solutions despite hard they may be.
Absolutely. And as you were talking, what I was thinking, and we're going to be wrapping up in 2 minutes. I was thinking that you at Medtronic, all of you at Medtronic should believe that each one of us might have a little piece of Medtronic inside ourselves. Oh, yes. So, we might have even a little piece of Medtronic in our hearts. So that's how conscious you should be, as a team of the mission that you all have. So just to wrap up with a beautiful thing that I love from you, and that's the one thing that connected you and I, was it, and this is a question I'm sure that our audience has. I read a post that you wrote on LinkedIn, and it was about not leaving a job only a job well done, but being more ambitious and leaving a legacy. And I thought, I have to meet this guy. So tell us how, as a leader who has the responsibility you have, of course, of growing your market, growing your company, how do you work? How do you become a purpose-driven leader while at the same time you're taking care of your duty, which is growing your company?
Okay. And I believe the simple answer to that is inspiring people to deliver the results that are expected of them, inspiring people to deliver the results that are expected of them. And with that, I am focused on my own organization, but I'm also focused on, because I'm an influencer, when I'm dealing with the hospitals, the decision makers and the payers, my providers. So if I'm there inspiring people that I currently manage, but also people that I interact with, that are peers or customers or providers, to deliver better results, I believe my job will be done.
And you're going to be leaving a legacy. So thank you so much, Felipe. Hang on, stay there with me 1 second. I have to say something, and I'm going to remind you all that there's like a little delay between when you type your question and when we access to it. So start typing your questions as we are wrapping up right here. First of all, thank you so much for being here. And I want to leave you and your team, because I love soccer, And although I'm from Argentina, and when Brazil and Argentina play, I have a very hard time because, of course, I want Argentina to win. But when Argentina loses to Brazil, which lately it's not so often, okay, let's put this straight. But Brazil wins, I cannot feel frustrated. I almost feel happy for Brazilians, which is something pretty unique in Argentinians. I mean, so,
Yeah.
but I have that.
Don't tell this to your friends in Argentina, right?
Well, they might be listening. It's okay. That's the way I am, and my kids always say, Mom, that's because you don't know anything about soccer. And I go like, yeah, that's because I love the good soccer, not, I'm not biased. But anyhow, it's a conversation we have. But I found a quote from Neymar for you and your team that I would like to leave with you. And that is that being on the Brazilian team is a privilege, and there are some marvelous players. I'm thrilled to be among them. That's a quote from Neymar. And I think that you, as Brazilians at Medtronic, you should be proud of being in the Brazilian team. You have a huge work in front of you. Brazil, it's a beautiful country that we want to see it thrive. And I'm sure that you're going to be leading a very successful organization with your people there.
Thank you very much. I love that quote. Very inspiring. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome, Felipe. Thank you for being here. Hey, we have a new question from Corinne. She says that she's curious on how you drive a consensus in your organization after soliciting many different viewpoints. The greater the divergence, the greater the creativity, but also the higher potential risk for disappointment if the culture is not just right. So
correct. This is a great question. As you open up, you start getting opinions that not necessarily are going in the same direction, right? So this is a challenge that is always worth the risk, because in the end of the day, if you are cutting off those diverging opinions as you're working through complex problems, if you're cutting them off or not really paying attention to them because they're not in consonance to what you're trying to drive, then you're losing the opportunity to building a solution to that complex problem that's really solid and robust. The risk reward here is always beneficial. You got to open up, but in the end, not necessarily drive consensus, which is something that we are also getting rid of that consensus-driven decision. We're putting that behind us in Medtronic. In the end of the day, we know that the solutions are not necessarily going to be consensus. If they are consensus, that means that they're very natural, and that's probably the direction we should be taking. If there's no consensus, there is a risk reward that you should balance.
Well, that's where you do your 80-20, right? And your diagonal, you use that 20% veto power that you have as a general manager, I guess, right? So just like the president of the United States, Corinne, he has a veto power.
Yeah, and the system with checks and balances is an awesome one. As you brought the president of the United States, democracies work that way. You have a system of checks and balances, right? So we try to incorporate that in our decision-making too, to make sure that we have a good and healthy sounding board to test and say, does this even make sense or not? What are the pros and cons? And then decide on the direction we're going to take.
Okay, great. So we have another question from Felipe. He's manager sales operations for Latin America at Thermo Fisher Scientific. Maybe it's a company, Felipe, you mentioned that you try to inspire all those around you. How do you do that given the different expectations you have from different people?
Leading by example, really being loyal to your cores, your values, your essence. I talk about my values a lot at Medtronic. I even say that it's pretty easy to make sure that I am on track with the things that I preach, because I've learned them when I was young. In my case, my parents, it can be anyone who raised you, inputted those core values in you, and I respect them above everything else. So, and I lead those things by example. if as a simple example, and truth be told, this is a real example, by the way. If I am picky on time, being punctual, I am the first one to attend that meeting. I'm making sure that I'm there on the spot at the exact time that meeting will start. So I really do a conscious effort on making my speech come to life in everything that we value.
In Corinne's words, you would be espousing your values. So you're walking your talk, basically, which is something that it sounds very obvious, but it's not obvious at all. I mean, there's so many preachers and not so many doers. So
there is an interesting aspect. There is a guy by the name of David Horsiger, who has built I believe it was a PhD thesis around trust, and how trust is the most powerful thing for leaders, and to embark on, leading people, negotiation skills. Everything is, you go back and everything is the trust that you have on that person, in that organization. And when you walk the talk, what you're building is you're putting bricks of trust in that relationship, right?
Okay, great. So just before we leave, let me tell you, to the audience and to yourself, because I think you're going to be interested in hearing this, is that our next guest next Sunday, she's a lady that comes from Nicaragua, and she's a doctor in the United States. She's a gynecologist, an obstetric surgeon, which is not very common for women to become surgeons and to be where she is, because and she's an oncologist. So she works at the Massachusetts General Hospital, where she is the chief medical doctor. So she's going to be talking to us about how do you lead an organization with super top professionals in the medical industry, was so male driven. And maybe you want to say something for her, that she's going to be with us next Sunday.
Oh yes, very looking forward, especially being in my segment on how she is a female in March, where we celebrate, the Female International Day in Leadership, Women International Day, and how is she driving that in an environment where it's very challenging, right? This segment is very traditional, so I'm looking forward to that conversation. I'll make sure I'm connected for that.
Thank you, Felipe. Thank you to all of you, and we'll see you next Sunday then with Dr. Marcela del Carmen, beautiful lady from Nicaragua. Can you imagine all the steps she had to, and all the glass ceilings she had to break to get where she is? She's adorable. So you'll see her next week. Thank you all. Take care. Have a very good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.